water has, however, a bit of an identity issue, I feel. We're not prepared for that. But oh my God, all this press and all these things and all these events and reception and Tino and I at some point exhausted are like, oh my God, we wish we want to go back to tree planting. Stepping into a region where you don't have millions of people.
So welcome to The Stream, an unscripted, unedited, free-flowing conversation featuring guests who reject the status quo with a bias for action in the world of water and beyond. My name is Tom Freyberg. I'm an environmental journalist and content creator specializing in water.
And I'm Will Sarney, an advisor and investor doing my part to solve wicked water problems.
And we are thrilled to be on the journey of season 9, which is looking at water and nature. A big thanks to our ongoing sponsor, Raymond James, our charity partner, Frank Water. And for those of you that have found our channel and are new to YouTube, please make sure you subscribe because it really helps to expand the reach of these amazing guests that we have in store for you in this season. So we are pleased to welcome Florent Kaiser, who is the CEO of Global Forest Generation, known as GFG, and the co-leader of Acción Andina. So Florent, great to see you and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me and look forward to the chat and let you know what we're doing in the Andes.
Very good. So, Florent, we first bumped into each other at the Earthshot Investor Breakfast in London, in Kensington Gardens, where there was a guest of honor, Princess Beatrix. So I think it was amazing to we almost did like a bit of a fireside chat interview between the two of us to kind of find out a bit more about your business and the impact. So I was kind of blown away by the vision for what you're doing. So we're really thrilled to bring you on the podcast and really dive into within Latin America the impact that you're having. But I think where we want to start and where we usually start with a lot of guests is the origin story and what led you to kind of become the CEO of GFG. And you spent a bit of time at the UN, right, in your early mid-20s, which maybe you could start there and kind of why you went on to do what you did and why you're still not at the UN.
Yeah. Easy, Tom, easy. You know,
I think I framed the question diplomatically, right?
Right.
You did. You were headed down the wrong path, though. So.
Well, I think highly of the UN. There's literally no better buddy on earth to try to, get us all to live happily together. It got all sorts of problems, but onto me. I was by that time in Southeast Asia, in Thailand, at the regional office of the Food and Agriculture Organization, which is hosted by the UN. And as a 25-year-old then, 24, 23, I don't really remember. But I remember that moment where I thought, I was trying to organize a youth event, and it was scheduled for November. This was April. And it was running a photo competition. And by the time they approved my budget for that event 6 months down the line, it was a year and a half later. And I said, I am simply done with it. There's no greater motivation killer than heavy bureaucracy. And this is not how we're going to tackle, the world's biggest problem, at least not with me as a young entrepreneur and lots of energy in the room. I'm out of here. And so that's when I left, and I got a very lovely invitation by today my wife to go to Peru. She was a fellow forester, forest engineer. I'm one myself, and she was very nice, and she was working in the Amazon rainforest and invited me to come over, and literally I took a plane and never left.
Amazing. I've noticed you've been very complimentary. Presumably she'll listen in. So, but amazing that you kind of up sticks and then threw yourself to the other side of the world. And then where was the kind of the spark then for the genesis? Because because you've got the GFG and then you've got Acción Andina, which is the kind of organization within that umbrella, right? So talk us through how that kind of came about.
So I'd say I have two origin stories, right? My personal one, I'll start with that one, and then we'll go into the institution. As I said, forest engineer, fell in love with forest early stage in my childhood, and then was doing some service for the German government by that time in Honduras in a reforestation project. That was when I was 18, 19, I think. And I really said, there's a lot to be done with forests worldwide. And then went to the UN, as I said, left it at some point. But that one question stayed with me. How can we team up globally, right, to really halt deforestation and save the world's forest with a much broader vision in mind, as in how can we really team up and do great things on Earth together that make a whole lot of sense, right? And so I grew up with that doom and gloom mindset, climate change, it's all ending, the planet is on the verge and so on. But I was always fascinated by that question. Okay, what do we do about it? What are the best examples on Earth of coming together and do huge things about it? And the lighthouse for me, the symbolic thing in forest that always drew my attention was the Great Green Wall, right? That gigantic partnership across an entire continent to restore forests and halt desertification and so on. And so that was the lighthouse. And so I think I don't even remember 5 years or 10 years forward, but some years forward, I meet one of our co-founders, Constantino Auca, an indigenous person from the high Andes. And he invites me to join one of the biggest reforestation days I had ever experienced. Over 1,000 people joined in, and we planted roughly 100,000 trees that in that one single day. And then at the end of the day, I always say this like that because it was literally, we sat around the fire and we started talking. And I said to Tino, hey, Tino, this is amazing. There's so much scale. There's so much seeing all these people happily joining in a celebration and planting 100,000 trees in one single day. There's a huge scaling thing here. There's a huge movement that can be built. And he actually opened up and said, my dream is to replicate what I've done here locally in Cusco, Peru, all across the country. And then eventually, by the end of the night, I think we had some drinks and so on, we said the entire Andes. And that was the vision birth. And there's all the other co-founders as well involved in that conversation. And so, but long story short, we said there's a huge thing to be done here. The Andes, it's majestic, it's big. There's a model grounded in indigenous communities, in indigenous culture. And there's a big, big case here, right? So that was the big origin story where that day we founded, spiritually almost, Acción Andina, eventually became that program. But we also founded Global Forest Generation because we knew Tino is doing an amazing job in Peru, right? But there's so many other leaders across the Andes that need to be involved in that. And we are missing a vehicle, right, that can help pull this all together and also access early stage funding. And there was no better place than actually do that in the US at the moment because, conservation funding and it was just very strategic. And so we co-founded, the co-founders co-founded Global Forest Generation, and that day we co-founded Acción Andina as well as a first major program. So this was from my point of view, the origin story.
I have a question. I want to go further back. That's a great story, by the way, and I want to come back to the scaling, the big ideas, which are, obviously needed more now than ever. But when in your youth did you get hooked on forests? Like what was it when you were young that compelled you, that spoke to you about forests? And I always find that to be an interesting answer from folks like us that just get hooked and have been hooked as far back as we can remember. If you don't mind.
Oh, no. We're going way back and deep, which is where we need to be. I think very honestly, there's no, and I still see that today, but I remember feeling through that. on the walks that I took essentially with my mother and rural France into forests and so on. But I
Wow.
found there's no greater place on earth where life just shines all around you. It's vibrant. It's there. It's insects. It's trees. It's everything is moving. Everything is alive until you cut it down. But that was the place where young Florent retracted to be alive. You know, that's the place, and I've never gone away from that, and I still do it today.
That that is poetic.
Mm.
I mean, really, and and very moving. So thank you for sharing that. I just think it's so important as we, you know, talk to people about why all of this matters. It is that connection, that visceral human connection that needs to be told.
Absolutely agree. Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you.
Oh, we went deep now.
Yeah, we did. Well, I'm moved, sincerely. I, now I'll scroll back to the present. Uh, Are you seeing technology as part of the solution? I mean, mobilizing people to plant trees, great. But is there an opportunity not to just hang your hat on technology, but to appropriately look at technology right now and say, hey, you know what? It can augment the human connection and human power behind a movement like this.
Absolutely, but I will clarify a couple of things for myself that I see in our work. First of all, what is technology, right? And I think our minds immediately go to tech, modern tech, digital tech. And I will borrow heavily from our co-founder here, the wisdom that he brings. The greatest technology alive is the technology of making human collaboration work. And that is way before digitalization. And so what we do in the Andes is reviving ancestral principles that excelled at that. And in the Andes, it's Aini and Minca in local Quechuan language. Aini means reciprocity. That's the relationship we have with one another, with one's family, neighbors, community, but also in that ancestral cosmovision, also to one and the nature. And then Minca, the second word in Quechua, means communal service, the commitment to do greater good, to do work in service of greater good. That technology, right, that human, social, cultural technology, if you want, those principles allow us today to bring tens of thousands of people together to do amazing work, right? And that, to me, I really want to make clear up front. All the technology beyond that, and I'm going to talk about that, that helps us elevate that, bringing resources, manage it better, scale this up, whatever language we choose, is useful as long as it's in service to that, in service to life. What is done so many times wrong is we pull in the great hope, right? We can solve things. We stick technology first, digital technology first, rather than trying to resolve the problem, right? And so that's where I get a little bit itchy. And some of our biggest partners, funders, donors, and partners, literally, because Salesforce was from day one a big international corporation specializing in technology. Yes, they helped us get some early funding and so on, but at some point we started working on technology. How do you manage today 40,000 people across 6-7 countries, right? And a few hundred years ago, you had messengers running around, right? And that took probably a whole lot of time. And today you have amazing ways of managing data, and connections at the end. And so this is where I think technology can accelerate a lot of the good stuff in service of life, in service of good things. But let's not mistake it and take it the other way around. That's my most important point.
And I agree with you. Um, just thinking, obviously, as an outsider, how do you mobilize people at that scale and do big things as, thoughtfully and quickly as possible? And, I mean, there's certainly a role for technology, but there is no but. There are technologies out there in terms of, seed planting with drones and, all of that are emerging. And I wonder if they're going to do well or not. Do you know what I
Can
mean?
I, on that point, can I just interject here? This is a brilliant
Yeah.
example, what you're putting forward. So think for a second in the Andes. What works extremely well, right? And I'm not trying to dismantle the point of technology, all the contrary, right? What works extremely well is using those ancestral, time-proven, timeless, if you want, principles that manage to unite a huge mass of people to do great work. We've been approached by many, many organizations with seed planting, drone planting, or all these sorts of technology to supposedly scale up our planting rate. Now I ask myself that question. Why on earth would I try to replace or enhance, right, the number
Oh.
one thing that works absolutely the best, right? The uniting of so many people, right?
Hmm.
And doing the act of planting. So there is an ecological function. You're planting a tree and it's making an impact and a tree will grow and all of that. And you want that, right? But the act for the young child or the elder to put that tree in the ground and having grown it over a year's time before will psychologically, socially, culturally be so powerful and symbolic and practical that you will care for that tree and that forest the entire, generation and generations to come. And so we can use technology to enhance many, many things. But I always push back on these drone planting. I get them. They are super, super useful in areas where there's not many people, right?
Right.
Where you need to remote access. And I can think of thousands of use cases for that, right? But
Mhm.
particularly in the high Andes, let's not try to replace the number one magic that brought us to success, right? So that's, yeah.
I love
That.
that. I love that. So you're kicking back against the hardware, and I love the fact that you actually question what is technology, because it's not just the result from the planting of the sea and obviously the environmental benefit and the carbon sink of having increased forest, but it's actually the process, the spiritual connection of those communities with the land, and it's actually the process and that sense of community from joining 40,000 people together in an activity, right? So it goes beyond the, yeah, amazing. So if there's
Well,
any drone seed planting companies listening,
no, I think they have a role. Look,
yeah,
in use case in the Andes, all right, there are areas where there's so little people.
right.
Why don't you learn from us the way we plant and
Hmm.
get the seed balls right and so on and help us plant where humans don't get to, right?
Right.
Put a swarm out there in the steepest hills and thing, in places where we really have a hard time. Some of our sites, it's 2 days to get to, right? Walking. You can't drive vehicles. It's uphill. It's muddy. It's everything. And so if we focus there, and there's a whole planning effort around that, brilliant, right? But let's not think it should replace the intent of replacing the human cohesion that you get through that. And I know none of us was suggesting that, right?
Mm-hmm.
The intent would be harmful. All right. And
Hmm.
I can think of so many other thoughts that heard about the over the last years. Now I had I won't mention names. I had a potential donor investor call with a big corporation, and literally the person told me, "Well, what I get is the best thing to plant as many trees as possible would be to find a huge area completely empty of people and seed ball them there, right? And have that forest grow alone." I was like, if your goal is just planting trees and making a green desert without any people, then you better start on Mars or somewhere else, right? Because fortunately and unfortunately, we have a lot of people on this earth that live on those lands. So it's what I want to trying to get to is quite often, I'll call it, and I'm part of that. Our Western mindset is very transactional. We are trained to think transactional and linear. We are intent and product or result, right? And what I've learned with ancestral culture, it's much bigger than, it's much more systematic. You have to consider Pachamama, Mother Earth. You have to consider the family. You have to consider the ancestors. You have to consider your future, 7 generations down the line. That is so much more depth into that and layers, right? And then if you extrapolate, you actually understand that the human cohesion, the relationships, through, between humans and nature is much, much more important than the actual result, immediate result on the ground. They need to go hand in hand, but that's very important.
This reminds me of a conversation I've had with Stu Orr. I don't know if you know Stu, formerly with WWF, but he always talks about values and values underpinning how you create value. And he's talking about water and biodiversity, but it just sounds very, very familiar. Again, poetic, moving,
Very, very good.
human.
So Florent, given we're kind of on the stream, and I remember having a really good conversation with Tino in London on the kind of the positive impact, not just on the environment, but on water from the activities you're doing. And you'd mentioned that the next phase of Acción Andina is to kind of the path to water and moving to kind of water-led conservation through Indigenous leadership. So it'd be great to kind of hear about that and the plans and the vision for kind of how water is such a key part of how this evolves.
Let me see if I can, with a little bit of a prelude on why water in the end is so important, if I can get to that relatively fast. So what's happening in the Andes? Glaciers are melting, right? At a very rapid pace. By 2050, I think 70% of the glaciers are supposed to be gone. And that has a huge impact on water security, both in the highlands, in the communities, as well as towards the Amazon. The high Andes are an intrinsic part of the Amazon basin as part of the hydrological system, right? They are a buffering mechanism that disperses water downstream, right? While water comes back from the Atlantic to the famous, what do you call the water rivers in the sky? They're bringing water to the Andes. It then freezes. They're getting to the glaciers, and then it's being dispersed slowly. That's on the Amazon side. On the Pacific side, mostly arid coasts. Peru is, completely arid, and people know Chile, Atacama, one of the driest desert of the earth. So the Pacific coast of South America is very dry in a lot of places. There's millions, actually hundreds of millions of people depending squarely on Andean water, right? So in a few decades, when these glaciers are gone, there's literally no alternative to that. Now, it's not entirely true. High Andean forest and ecosystem have the ability to capture and disperse water, similar to the glaciers on a different way and scale, but similar to glaciers. Unfortunately, while the glaciers are melting, there's only 2 to 5% of these high Andean ecosystems left in the altitudes after centuries of deforestation, right? And so if you understand that these ecosystems are the only natural substitute to the water holding capacity of the glaciers, and you won't be able to bring the glaciers back. I mean, think technology all you want, right? But I think it's too much of an endeavor to even try. Then the logical consequences, we need to really drastically dramatically bring back the ecosystems. So restoration is a huge priority for the continent. So, and just for the sake of the exercise here, why do these ecosystems capture water? I mean, you have specifically polylepis forest. It's the highest forest in the world. And there was an article, highest forest in the world that you never heard of. It's a polylepis tree. And that tree has the magic ability to grow moss on its branches. That moss filters out water or humidity out of the air. It condenses, and then it drops on the floor. When the moss gets heavy like a sponge, it all drops on the floor. You have super rich biological layers forming that capture water like huge sponges, right? And over decades and centuries, you get really deep sponge-like soils that have, that store millions and millions of liters of water. And these forests then create wetlands and peatlands around it. I mean, they're all part of an really water-rich ecosystem in the high altitudes. So the communities are realizing water is a big issue, and they are now starting to bring it back. And Acción Andina is nothing more than a support system to celebrate their leadership, to support them technically, financially, and many other ways, right, to actually make that work possible. When we started Acción Andina, it was all about reforestation. Tino, again, I will refer many times to him, a genius. He understood that while reforestation is not the end goal, right, it will take billions and billions, if not more, trees to reforest the entire Andean mountain range, right? It's millions of hectares. It is a very practical social tool. Reforestation is the only activity that will get the entire community involved using Aini and Minka, the principles I mentioned before. So you have 1,000 and 2,000 people participating. And that act of participating while planting those trees seeds not only in the ground, seeds a seed not only in the ground, but also in the minds of people. These people who have reforested will take care of those trees. So by doing reforestation at scale, you're already seeding the mindset of protecting the forests, existing forests and new forests in the multiple generations to come. And that was the first phase. So we grew Acción Andina with reforestation first, and we've planted, by the end of this year, I think we'll have planted 15 million native polylepis trees, each of them with their unique ecological water impact function, right? It's very important that they stay and we protect them long term. But now coming to a question, sorry for the long introduction. We have figured that if we are really serious about water, and the communities are, and we are too, right? If we're really serious about water, we cannot stay at reforestation. We have to really look at the entire magic landscape, right? So it's forest, it's wetlands, it's peatlands, it's grasslands. I mean, we're speaking dozens of millions of hectares in the high Andean environment, right? That are just below the glaciers. And so Acción Andina, while it started mostly as a reforestation initiative, right, led by the communities, is now moving into what we call phase 2. And we gave it a name. It's called Yakuhnan, which means the path of water in Quechuan language. So Acción Andina is taking the path of water. Why? Because the communities want the water and the continent wants the water, right? And so everything that we're going to do in the next few years has to be about water. We're expanding our activities from reforestation to forest protection to restoration of wetlands and peatlands. We're expanding how we fund this. This is a big part of that, right? How do you use water as a narrative and a tool to actually fund this work? Tell you that. That means less global transaction, more in region, direct transactions. We can go back to that. And there's obviously a huge narrative layer, right? Away, or not away, beyond the tree focus to the long-term stewardship of the landscapes providing water. And there's a lot in there.
That's, I mean, absolutely logical. Are you seeing more corporate interest, let's say local, regional corporations that actually have a legitimate leading water stewardship program that are looking at you and saying, this is something we want to invest in because we believe that water has value. And I mean, any traction there at all, or?
It's beginning, I would say. Well, there's two elements here. One, a lot of people are saying, well, the age of water is coming and so on. Yes, it's
Oh,
true,
yeah.
but that's because the age of water scarcity, or at least, we hear water wars and all of water conflicts and so on. And I think that's real in many places of the earth, right? Water has, however, a bit of an identity issue, I feel. While on one hand, it's the most natural, it's what we're made of. It's the most natural representation of life, right? That we have out there, well before the tree. Most waterworks, water management has been, and I apologize if anybody gets hurt on that comment, brought into an industry, the water management industry, that feels so unsexy, so unattractive, right? Because and it's been around for hundreds of years, right? But it's just heavy to work with that, and you have a lot of water industries here that have been using water for hundreds of years, as I said, right? But from there to say there is a narrative that is about renewal, about regeneration, about scaling up, about transforming things, these old industries have the natural ability to be a bit conservative, and so there's a big challenge there, I think, globally, not only in the Andes, on that.
You won't offend us with those comments.
Right.
I promise you.
Yeah, well, and then the positive, right? You have the communities absolutely seeing the result on, water security, big issue. We need to do something about it. Now, I would use that one example that was, to me personally, that thinks a lot of the business coherence of what we do, a light, a turning point. We have one of the biggest banks in Peru that approached us recently and said, after we won the Earthshot Prize. So they saw this and saw we're in Peru and so on. And I said, Florent, if water is becoming a huge issue in region for my clients, all the companies I fund and lend money to, that's agriculture, that's hydroelectric companies, that's all sorts of multiple sectors depending directly on waters, and then many more connected depending indirectly on water, right? If they have a problem because of that water, then I, as a bank who's lending money, have a big problem too.
Right.
How can we start today investing as much as we can to prevent or lower the risks for us as a bank? And to me, that is a turning point, right? Because it's business directly in their supply chain, right? So that finds itself to the boardroom, right? And now our task is to find all the middle layer of contracts, legal stuff, technology, and project management, and whatever else to actually make this a reality and invest some of the dollars these banks and other businesses that depend on water directly or indirectly can actually bring. And so that's an inherent part of the phase 2 of Acción Andina, figuring out that middle layer. How do we make transactions between downstream users depending on water and the often marginalized for hundreds of years natural stewards of the landscapes providing the water, the indigenous and local communities living so remote in the highlands. And there's a huge, amazing challenge to make that middle ground work in full respect of those cultures and communities.
Well, that's a key word, respect. As you know, and you brought this up earlier about, really the Western mindset, which is just so painfully transactional. Everything is transactional.
You mentioned there the local bank getting in touch off the back of the Earthshot Prize, and that, as I mentioned at the start of the call, that's where we kind of first came into contact. How has that been for you and Tino? Kind of, because obviously you guys were like to use a British expression, like the poster children of the Earthshot Prize, right? Amazing, lots of press coverage, and I think you went on to meet the royal family of the UK, huge ceremony. Would you say, as well as exposure to the big national banks back in Peru, has it kind of been a rocket for you guys? How would you kind of explain life post winning the Earthshot?
Wow, a great question. There's many layers to it, but I'll try to summarize. It has been both transformational, or at least it will be transformational over time, as well as hugely challenging for us. Right? So transformational because it opens up, a platform to tell your story to donors, investors, mainstream society. As you said, I was very surprised. The bank in Peru heard about this. So the royal family, the prince, has this magic aura when used, well for positive causes that attracts people, right? And that made an impact. So the reputational aspect it gives us is something that none of us will, that will not be taken away from us. It's that these guys are doing great stuff. Listen to them. And since then, any door we knock onto is, oh yeah, you've won the Earthshot Prize, right? That is something that is transformational, right? Nobody turns us away. They all at least listen to our story, right? And that's a clear before and after. Hugely challenging. Why? There's many layers to that. We were not prepared for that. But oh my God, all this press and all these things and all these events and reception and Tino and I at some point exhausted are like, oh my God, we wish we want to go back to tree planting and how do we even make use of that, right? And then as well, all media things, it goes and maximum and then it drops if you don't have the capacity in the house to actually make use of that long term, right? And so that's a critical challenge. I'll go a bit deeper why it was very challenging. And again, I don't think I'm saying anything that is not known already. We won £1 million with that prize, right? We were the winner of the 2023 Earthshot Prize. Well, £1 million or winning money in general is a very, there's a practical aspect. You have £1 million more than you had before, and there is a symbolic aspect. You won money, right? And now a lot of things gonna be different. Well, £1 million was a sixth of our budget that year, right? So we have, and we talked a lot about how it's going to be transformative, and we invested in things that were catalytic to us and that we couldn't do before, and so on and so forth. It was all done right. And we had, however, some totally unrelated to the Earthshot Prize and so on. We have some of our biggest funders that were struggling. And we won £1 million overnight, and fast forward, abbreviating here a little bit, we lost $3 million in the following months. Now, that's not yet only problematic. That's a fixable issue if you know how to fundraise. Think the local communities and our local partners. On stage, they see us celebrating. They see us winning an incountable amount of money for local partners, right? And then we come back and have to cut budgets. That was a big challenge for us, of trust, of communication, of leadership. And these are the sort of challenges that nobody anticipates, right? And nobody's being prepared for. And so that was very challenging for us. But I will say, to end on a very positive note, winning the Earthshot Prize is transformational for us. You cannot count it in 1 year or 2 years' time. You have to count it over a decade. That external recognition, one, right, of having won the Earthshot Prize and having all those sorts of doors open and people listening to you. And second, that internal recognition to all our partners, ourselves, the leaders, and so on, that we've done something quite cool, right? And that gives you a whole lot of energy to keep going, to go over those challenges I mentioned, and go for the next level, right? And so that is a very, very important part of that.
Well, appreciate the honesty, I think, Florent, on the positives and the challenges of winning such a kind of brand exclusive prize. So, and that's, I guess, something that not everyone sees, right? What you've just explained, the fact that you lost to 3 million and perhaps the issues back with the local community when you have to make budget cuts. So yeah, I appreciate you telling that story. So to maybe wrap things up, because as you mentioned, you've had such huge impact so far. 15 million trees by the end of this year. 6 countries so far are Ecuador, Peru, Bolivia, Argentina. You've mentioned in previous conversations that you're now looking to the Himalayas, right, and to actually expand and even drive the rocket ship forward even more. So if you can, we've only got a couple of minutes left, but just kind of wrap up. Where are you headed? Like, what's the kind of the next thing? You mentioned about phase 2 and the path to water, but in terms of like the global footprint of where you're going.
One thing I forgot to mention, and there's 2 directions we're headed. One, we will stay with Acción Andina for decades and decades to come. We think of Acción Andina's mission to restore the high Andean, the Andes mountains of 100-year effort. So we're not going anywhere. GFG, Acción Andina as a whole, will stay and stick to mission, and there will be phase 2 now, but there will be phase 3, 4, 5, and 6, and it's gonna. We're 6 years in, so we have 94 years to go, right? So I will just say here, very importantly, we will stick in this region. Now, what we have experienced at Acción Andina is that it has a that the type of work, the type of interaction, the type of partnerships have a global, there's a global potential. There's many places on Earth that face a similar change at the moment. The glaciers are melting in the Andes, but also melting in the Himalayan mountain range, right? And there's all sorts of other regions where deforestation, droughts, and many other things are impacting landscapes that are huge and relevant. And global forest generation, remember the first question I asked myself, can we come together across entire continents to do something? There's many, many places on Earth where this needs to happen. I'm personally motivated by the Himalayan mountain range since forever. And even more so, right? You work in the Andes, and I had the amazing opportunity to travel in February to India. And what resonated, the narrative I carried on these very exploratory trip was from the Andes to the Himalayan mountain range, right? From the Andes to India. And to me, stepping into a region where you don't have millions of people, you have billions of people depending on water, right, from the mountains, where you have huge challenges on deforestation, erosion, but where you also have amazing ancestral principles. I mean, think of India, the millennial culture, and there's one thing that all the communities, ancestral communities and societies have in common. They have those principles to get everybody to get together and do work together. And so, you have this across the Himalayan mountain range in different ways. There's many different cultures there. I'm not trying to minimize that to India or anything else. But you have other places on Earth. Think Ubuntu across, Africa or in some region. Think many, many other ancestral principles, right, that have the potential to form human-led effort on an unprecedented scale. And that's the model of global forest change. That's where we want to act. We're not going to replicate Acción Andina, but we're going to replicate the spirit and the cohesion, right, the support system where this could work. And that's the journey we're on.
I love how the model and the vision is based on where there's essentially ancestral principles. I mean, how often will, not particularly on the podcast, but you hear from young entrepreneurs that are focused on where there's market potential or capital growth,
Oh
right?
yeah.
And
Oh,
actually, this kind of
it,
flips that model, and it's actually that's what's attracted you to those regions because of the ancestral
yeah.
like principles, right? It's so refreshing to hear. So, yeah, amazing vision. And Florent, we need to kind of wrap up. So, as we expected, like a super inspiring update from you. So, yeah, Will, maybe to close off.
I so this has been a fabulous
Mm,
conversation and inspiring. Um, my big takeaway is that personal human scale connection, which started when you were a child walking in the forest, and now what you do as an adult, and how you're thinking about that that moment in time and doing big things. So yeah,
I,
that's my
well,
takeaway.
thank you so much. Thank you so much. I'll just very, very brief, Tom, what you said.
mm,
When you're looking markets and so on, right? If our collective dream and goal is making money and profit, you absolutely should go to markets, right? It's a very logical conclusion.
mm.
If your ultimate goal is regenerating the earth, healing planet, healing societies, communities, and you care about people, right? Before profit, then you should look at people first, right? And that is what shines through Acción Andina today. And that is what shines through our journey on how we conduct that kind of work. And I think, frankly, it is still today, although all our society are based today on an economic system that incentivizes profit over other things,
Right.
it is still an illusion. What holds us together is not profits and markets only. It is the social cohesion, it's our relationships, it's the culture, it's the identity, it's how we relate to one another and live together, right? And that's what we need to tap in. And it's so much more powerful than the economy, markets. I think that's my message.
Pretty good one.
That's a pretty strong
Yeah.
concluding note. Yeah, amazing.
Yeah.
Well, Florent, thanks so much. Please let's kind of keep in touch on this. We'd love to have you back, maybe in a couple of years' time to sort of see the continued impact, and with the vision to continue beyond Peru and kind of journey to the Himalayas. So yeah, thanks so much for your time. We really appreciate it.
I,
No, likewise.
I,
Thank you for the fabulous conversation.
I want to go plant trees with you.
Oh, come.
Uh,
We plant trees every year in the millions.
Perfect.
Amazing.
Come.
Count us in. All right,
Sounds
Florent,
good.
thanks so much.
Take care of yourself. Be well.
Bye-bye.